we're making some changes.
Yeah.
Change can be hard,
Yep.
but change can also be a really good thing. What's changing, Josh?
Well, there's a point in every journey when you stop moving, whether it's you're on a road trip, for example. At some point you have to stop moving because you're going to run out of gas, or you have run out of gas, or your battery's not charged if you're driving an EV. But at some point, there's every point in the journey where you have to stop moving and kind of recalibrate.
Right.
And you stop in the journey, not because you're lost, but because you're uncertain of what the next step should be. Now, obviously, if you're in a car, the next logical step would be to fill it up with gas or recharge the battery, right? But in our daily lives, when you stop moving, it's not that you're broken. And as we said before, you're not broken when you stop moving in your journey. You're just static at that point.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the whole premise behind the podcast, and why I named it Nonstatic, is to kind of highlight that we all get to a point in life where we have a hard time moving forward for whatever reason. Right. Where you've gotten disillusioned about something, or there's an obstacle in our way, there's a barrier of some kind. And so we're kind of that way with the podcast right now. And after we've done some reflection as a team, we thought we'd kind of not completely abandon what Nonstatic used to be, but to kind of move it in a better direction that I think resonates better with people.
More fine tuning.
Yeah, exactly. And so our new tagline is Nonstatic, practical psychology to keep you moving forward. Because that's really what it's all about, right? It's not, I'm very focused on not only acknowledging the past, but also figuring out, in spite of the past or because of the past, how do we move forward? And that's really what this podcast is all about.
Yeah.
So again, I would just I want to remind you and everybody else that the podcast, at least this one in particular, it's not about endless self-help or chasing the next productivity phase. We all get plenty of that, as I've called it.
Well, that's
before.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
There's so much. I end up with, I noticed that I found like there's so much different self-help, self-improvement podcasts and books and newsletters and all that stuff. You can spend 24/7, 365 reading and listening and watching, and you're still not going to get to it all. And I have a tendency to have that FOMO feeling of like, oh my gosh, I don't want to, what's the next magic bullet? And
right.
then I end up going static and not actually doing any of it.
Yeah.
Because it's too much.
And all those things are great, but for me, it's more about understanding motion. Okay, so it's not about endless self-help or chasing that next productivity hack. You can go elsewhere if you want. You want the latest 3-step process for getting your to-do list done, other than just doing it.
Not getting that here, though.
It's more about understanding that forward motion is important, and we can talk more at some point in the future. But our brains function on motion, and we've kind of talked about it before. So this podcast is going to focus on, practical psychology, practical mental health information to kind of keep you moving forward. Not you specifically, but you as an audience moving forward. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of about I want to bring the science of psychology and kind of boil that down to what does it actually mean on a daily basis, and how can we use it to improve our lives. So the science and psychology of what keeps us going and keeps us moving forward.
Yeah.
So I think in order, as in typical Josh fashion, in order to move forward, it's also important to kind of understand the past and where we've been, right? And this is kind of, Nonstatic has been kind of a creative outlet for you and I, right?
Yeah.
We've kind of figured out as we've gone along, and we've had people come on board that have actually told us, hey, you need to kind of relook at some things, right?
Everything you're doing is wrong.
Right, pretty much, right?
Pretty much.
So Nonstatic began, and it kind of took on the role of a space for ideas, right? And we would come up with these interesting titles and whatnot, which I still enjoy doing. But it was more of a space for reflection and story, right? And to kind of take time to pause and think about what's going on in life and how do we get here and that kind of thing. I've always been fascinated by growth from the standpoint of what it means to change. So there's growth, and then what does it mean to change as a result of that growth? So when we talk about non-static, and again, we talked briefly about why static is why people get static. Most people can explain why they're stuck. anybody can come up with a reason why they can't move forward. You know, my marriage isn't moving forward because I'm lacking in this skill or that skill, or I can't move forward in my life with my job because I have these barriers that are in the way. So we can all explain why we're here, or why we get stuck perhaps, or why there's a barrier, or why there's a problem, but we often don't know how to move again. And that's kind of the biggest challenge that we face a lot of time, is not identifying that we're stuck. It's great that we've identified that we're stuck, but now what? We struggle with knowing how to move again.
Right.
Generally speaking.
And stay moving too.
Yeah, exactly. And if we're constantly engaging in reflection without forward motion, then we kind of get stuck in this unproductive loop where we keep focusing on how we got here rather than not only how we got here, but how can we move forward. And that's why I like to pick on productivity all the time, right? Is a lot of productivity points of view, or the productivity industry, I'll just say, is focused on keeping you in that planning stage. And again, this is just an example.
Yeah.
They're focused on keeping you on that planning stage. And if you just keep planning it and planning it just the right way, then you'll eventually achieve what you want to achieve.
Then you'll get back 5 hours of your life every week, and you'll only be in your email 15 minutes a day.
And so we're not going to focus necessarily on those things. We're going to focus on, okay, how are we going to apply psychology or apply mental health concepts to this idea of moving forward?
Yep.
Obviously, my background is in psychology, so we're going to focus now on the psychology that you can use. So, and I'm not going to get into big, huge concepts with people because I think we can get kind of lost in the forest if we get too big.
Yeah.
The focus is going to be on small, what I call evidence-based principles to help you build movement forward, not just developing insights. Mm-hmm. What do I mean by that? I want to give people small chunks of information that's been researched and has been proven to work in order to help them build movement. So I'm not here to help people build their 15-year, 20-year plan or their even 1-year plan. I'm trying to give them small chunks of information that's relevant that they can apply in their daily lives.
Then they can start doing that today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So I want to encourage the audience, you might be at a standstill in your career or in a relationships or even you're in a rebuilding stage after a burnout. Mm-hmm. But the mechanics of momentum apply everywhere, regardless of what kind of situation you're in. And I've learned the hard way that self-awareness alone doesn't move the needle, right? I'm a very introspective person, as you probably realized, but we can kind of get stuck in that.
Yeah.
You have to translate that awareness of where you're at in life into, a small, reliable motion going forward. Because if you can't achieve that, then you're just going to keep staying stuck, and then we're going to be frustrated as to why we're stuck. And so again, we're going to be focusing on more the application of mental health and psychology in particular, and how it can really benefit people's lives. Mm-hmm. Are you following me so far?
I'm following you, Josh. Okay. I am.
So, John, the word non-static is kind of made up, right? I just took the word static and put a negative connotation in front of it. So, how would you define it?
Non-static.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answer. I'm putting you on the spot.
I would say when I think of non-static, I think of clear.
Sure.
I think of bright. I think of kind of like peace.
Sure.
Or confidence, more confidence.
Yeah.
Than anything.
Yep.
That's
exactly. So I want to kind of revisit what non-static is, and that is kind of the opposite of stillness, stagnation, and rigidity, right? Mm-hmm. There's obviously nothing wrong with being still for a moment, but if that stillness never has forward momentum at some point to it, it's not going to be beneficial to us, right?
Right.
We certainly don't want to get static, and we certainly don't want to get rigid in our thought processes, and that's kind of where we park non-static, is to kind of go against this idea of staying stuck in the past or continuing to process things that have happened in the past without figuring out a way to move forward. Mm-hmm. If we never figure out a way to move forward, that's kind of the definition of stagnation, right?
Right.
So, because I'm obviously I'm a metaphor person, think of water. So think of a lake. Minnesota's known for their lakes here.
We like our lakes here, Josh.
I actually have no idea how many lakes are actually in Minnesota.
I want to say that there was like upwards of I could be wrong, like upwards of 20 or 30,000.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Not
there's a lot.
Not 10,000 lakes for sure. Definitely more than that.
But there's kind of people have heard before about what's called a stagnant shoreline. And that stagnant shoreline on a lake is where there's no exchange of water. The water stays still for whatever reason. On a lake, if that happens, when the water is static and it doesn't move, it breeds algae.
Yep.
But when it flows, it stays clear.
Yep.
So movement necessarily isn't chaos. It's not meant to be chaos. It's meant to be healthy. Movement is a sign of health, right?
Yeah.
People that are physically active or physically move tend to be healthier. Brains are the same way. When a brain moves, it's healthy. It means it's changing. It means it's adapting. And when I mean that our brain moves, if you think of how the brain structures work, is our brain functions on movement. It functions with electrical impulses that are constantly moving back and forth within the brain.
Yep.
And when our brains stop moving, we're dead, right? The brain stops operating.
Right.
And so movement in our brain is very healthy, and it's related to overall health as for us as individuals. And so that's where I want to focus Nonstatic. Now, if we talk about, I'm going to introduce some big words for you, some psychological research, John. It's kind of this idea of the difference between homeostasis and allostasis. We know what homeostasis is, right?
Right.
What is homeostasis, John?
Okay.
It's where, so if
homeostasis is where you're just kind of like,
we're in
like your base
a state of being, and nothing's really going on. So
it's just like
example,
your baseline.
Yeah, our
like
bodily
chill.
systems try to maintain a state of homeostasis typically, right?
Right.
If we get really anxious, our bodies try to do things to calm us down, right? That's kind of achieving this idea of homeostasis, right? Mm-hmm. Compare that to allostasis, which is where we're trying to constantly move. So humans are actually wired for adaptive change. While our brains kind of try to keep us safe by avoiding change, at the same time, we're also wired to adapt to our environments, to learn from our environments, and grow from them based on our experiences.
Right.
So real consistency isn't doing nothing. Real consistency is actually showing up for change and not resisting that change that happens. It's just important to keep that understand that from that standpoint.
Our brains are plastic, and they want, and they're malleable, and they really, you feel better when you're learning stuff and you're doing something and you're staying active. It's just.
So I would invite the listeners to kind of think about, and maybe you can think about this too, is think of one area of life where you felt static for a period of time. You know, do you have any experience?
Do I have any experience with that? I have. How much time do you have, Josh? One basic one that keeps on coming up is my exercise. I used to exercise religiously 6 days a week.
Yep.
I never skipped leg day. Was always
that's a lie, but okay.
I never skipped leg day. I hate it. I hate it. I love skipping. Love skipping abs. Abs by far the worst. Just hate them. Yep. But they look great. Used to anyways. Mm-hmm. And then I just somehow, for some reason or another, I got out of the habit of daily. So like one day turned into 2 days, turned into a week, turned into a month, turned into a year. And here I am 5 years later, still not really working out as much as I would like to at all.
So there's a great example. So and exercise is a good one.
I figured that was probably one that a lot of people could relate to.
We could all exercise more, right?
Right.
It's not practical for you to go from, just for the sake of conversation, to go from not exercising now to exercising 6 days a week, right? That's not practical at all.
And it's out.
It's probably not safe either.
I would say. I was just going to say that's actually a reason why it's taken me so long to get back into the swing of things, because I think that I should be where I was 5 years ago, and then I go that hard, and then I injure myself, and it's like, well, shoot, now I got to take a week off because I'm now in my 40s. And I don't recover fast. Yeah.
So so let's kind of take that example, and rather than be all or nothing, like what would it look like to add 1 degree of motion to that idea of exercise this week, rather than going 6 days? What would it look like to add just 1 degree of motion?
Go for a walk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Something small. So that's kind of what we're kind of gearing towards here is not going from doing nothing to running in an Ironman next week, right? It's going from not exercising as much as you want to moving the needle just a little bit by 1 degree. And so that's kind of what the whole concept of this podcast is not necessarily trying to do it all at once, but taking small steps in order to get there. And we all kind of know that intrinsically, that in order to get somewhere, smaller steps are better. But when we apply that in our real life, we think it has to be all or nothing.
We are all right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And I would also add that often growth feels like instability at first. Sometimes when we take steps, it can be a challenge for us because we feel like we're essentially destabilizing our sense of homeostasis, or we're destabilizing our typical routine.
Yeah.
And so often growth feels like instability, and that's why we all a lot of times have a difficult time initiating that growth or initiating the steps that we need in order to move forward.
Yeah.
So I would add that Nonstatic isn't about being restless. So it's not about this sense of anxiety that we're not achieving things or moving towards what we want to move towards. Nonstatic is not about being restless. It's about being responsive. So being aware of what we're thinking about and being aware of where we're at in life and then responding accordingly in a healthy way. Does that kind of make sense?
That makes sense. So
that's kind of the reframe of the Nonstatic podcast. So I kind of want to talk about the first several episodes that we'll do, and we kind of mapped out about 10 of them. We're going to talk a lot. I call it momentum mechanics, and I'm not trying to get too ambiguous or too vague, but we're going to kind of talk about this idea of how do we build momentum going forward? Again, using this idea of applied psychology or applied mental health concepts in our daily life. So again, momentum mechanics is more about the psychology of movement in everyday life. We're not talking about exercise necessarily. We're talking about just moving forward with our goals, moving forward with our relationships, moving forward with our health, whatever it may be. We're talking about the psychology of movement forward in everyday life. So we're going to be talking about, over the next several weeks, not necessarily about massively overhauling our lives, because that can be overwhelming. That's why New Year's resolutions fail.
Almost always fail.
Right? Is because they're these ridiculously high achieving goals that are impossible for even the best of us to achieve. So it's not about massive overhaul. It's more about looking at friction, flow, focus, and then kind of flexibility with adjusting to all of those as we move forward. So in each episode, we're going to kind of be breaking it down. There's going to be kind of four areas or 4 segments in each episode that we're going to kind of talk through. First, we're going to introduce a concept. So, for example, the concept will be like a core idea, like the science of starting is going to be one of them. Right? What does that look like? What is the science behind actually starting something? You say you want to do something. What's the science behind why it's so hard just to start? You have a big project at work. And we all know that once we get going on the project, it actually is much easier to do. Yeah. But the science of starting is often the most difficult piece of the puzzle. And so that's an example. We're going to introduce that core idea, and then we're going to look at what does mental health and psychology have to say about that principle or model. We're going to look at a specific principle that psychology has, or a model that we can apply to that core idea to make it meaningful. Then when we kind of establish those two things, we're going to have a practice, meaning how would you use it today? Rather than, it's one thing to talk about a core idea and then to talk about a principle or a model. It's another, so what, right? What do you do now that you have that information, and what would it look like on a practical daily basis to kind of give people some things to actually grab hold of rather than some ambiguous prompting or ideas. And then we'll end every podcast with kind of a challenge or a prompt about how they can kind of pursue it in their daily lives.
It's a good structure. I like that.
Yeah. And so I kind of want to talk about some episodes that we have in the pipeline. The first one, like I alluded to, is the science of starting. It's going to be obviously one that will probably be one of the first ones we do. And it's going to be talking about, like, as we said, sometimes starting is the most difficult thing. Well, starting is the most difficult thing, not sometimes. And so we're going to talk about why does the beginning always drain us so much, more so than the actual process. Why does beginning it actually drain us? We'll talk about that. There's another a podcast that we're going to be working on called the Friction Index, which is, as we're moving along, what are some resistance points and why do we encounter resistance at certain areas when we're moving forward? We kind of talk about our brain and how it responds to resistance. And then we'll talk about resilience. Resilience is a really big piece. We talk a lot about, in the field talks a lot about burnout, being resilient in our careers, those kinds of things. We're going to talk about something called micro-resilience, which is really how do you recover momentum when you faltered? So for someone that missed a week of working out, how do you recover momentum without catastrophizing and completely giving up, right?
Yeah.
That's what micro-resilience is, and we'll kind of unpack that.
Yep.
We'll talk about something called identity drift, and that's really just talking about, when goals and self-image don't align, right? As people, we're constantly changing, constantly adapting, and sometimes the goals we have set for ourselves no longer align with who we are as individuals, and that's okay. We'll talk about that. And then one that's really important is called the emotional dashboard. And so in a nutshell, I want to reframe how we look at emotions. I want to reframe them to read emotions as information. What does that mean? Well, it means not seeing them as an interruption. Often when we experience a negative or a positive emotion for that matter, we look at it as an interruption to what we're doing. And what I want to kind of talk about is the science behind reframing that and then reading emotions as information about a situation we're in rather than an interruption. All that will be coming in the upcoming weeks.
Those are some really good topics. I think it's gonna strike a chord with a lot of people.
Hopefully, I'm hoping it does.
Yeah.
So that's what this whole podcast is really about, is reducing the energy cost of motion going forward. So that's kind of the goal that we're looking at. And that's kind of really what drives us, or really what drives me to kind of work on this project, is to be real forward-looking, be optimistic about what we have in front of us, and be forward-looking rather than dwelling too much on the past. There's nothing wrong with reflecting on the past. But it's important to acknowledge the past, but then use that acknowledgement and that reflection to move forward in a healthy way that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if you stick with us for the podcast, you'll start to build a personal psychology toolkit, I'll call it, for motion, something that you can reach for when life feels stuck. So again, this is not about just ambiguous ideas that sound nice, but we're not really sure how to apply. The whole goal is to give people some real tools that they can use to keep themselves moving forward, because that's really what life is about, is forward movement in a healthy way.
So in some ways, it's a little, we're all going to be getting a little bit of an associate's degree in psychology.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
A little bit,
Psych 101 maybe.
Yeah.
Psych
led by one of the greats.
Right.
How about that?
So a big phrase I like to use is "so what," right? We've given all this information about where we're going. So what? Why are we doing this? The whole goal of this is to connect movement to meaning and well-being. We live in a world obsessed with speed. How quickly can we get things done? But velocity without direction, just spins us in circles. If we're constantly chasing the next biggest thing, the next quick fix, we're just going to keep spinning our wheels. And that's why I think a lot of people get stuck, is they're not sure how to move forward in a planful, intentional, meaningful way.
Sure.
There's this idea of hedonic adaptation, and that's a really big word for this concept, this sense that we feel is that progress feels fleeting because our baseline is constantly shifting. As individuals, we're constantly changing, and so our baseline constantly changes. And so often progress feels fleeting because of that. So what I want to encourage people is that if we integrate this kind of idea this integration of behavioral science, satisfaction is less about outcome and more about continued engagement. Why do I say that? if we're only focused on the outcome rather than the engagement piece, we're going to lose the growth that we have along the way and the joy of the journey, I like to call it.
Sure.
There's so much richness and value in the actual journey or the actual engagement in the process rather than just the outcome. Certainly goals are important. Certainly the outcome is important. But really, the true benefit comes from the continued engagement. And my goal or my hope is for people to get tools that can keep them engaged with their lives, regardless of where they're at. I also want to explore stagnation psychology. So there is a mental health cost to chronic being static or chronic stasis. Okay. If we as human beings aren't moving forward in a healthy, meaningful way that benefits us, the mental health concerns are pretty significant. Low energy, low agency or low autonomy, right? We don't feel like we're able to make any decisions for ourselves because we're inefficacious in that way. There's this idea of learned helplessness. So if we're not moving forward in a meaningful way, these kind of mental health concerns can very easily creep in. That's why we have such high anxiety in our culture, such high depression rates are so high, is because we're not moving forward and engaged in a meaningful way.
I think a lot of that's because, I mean, I know this is kind of more of an overview of what of the changes that we're making, but there's so many opportunities for entertainment.
Right.
I think that definitely contributes a lot to low energy, low agency.
Well, I think entertainment is great. I think a lot of entertainment that we consume or the media that we consume is a kind of a self-medication for this sense of not being able to move forward or low energy, low agency that we often have.
Yeah.
But what I want to encourage people is that movement, even if it's imperfect, is one of the best antidotes to despair. And I'm not saying that everybody is despairing out there, but I do think we get down on ourselves a lot. Right. I do think we often are our own worst enemy. We're constantly looking backwards, thinking I should have done that, or I should have done this differently. I should have made that decision. In this scenario, I should have done that instead of what I did do. And we can we can feel bad about ourselves, and we can get despaired based on our decisions we made in the past. But I want to encourage people that even if movement of any kind forward, even if it's imperfect, is one of the best ways to combat regret that we may have about what we did or didn't do in the past. So what I would argue, you don't need clarity to begin. You need motion to find clarity, right? And again, that's kind of where I pick on popular psychology. Is popular psychology the focus is on how do you get clear? How do you clear your head? How do you get rid of your to-do list? All these things, which are good, but you're not always going to find clarity right away in the moment. And you don't need clarity to move forward. Often we need motion, or we need forward progress of any kind to find that clarity. It's the idea that we don't really know where we're going until we start going.
That's a good point. I guess that's kind of true with what Nonstatic, how that started out. We started out, we just like, hey, let's just start.
Right, exactly.
Then we kind of found our footing a little bit, and then after we've done this for about a year now, I think maybe a little bit longer. I think
a little more than a year.
A little more than a year.
Yep.
And then now, I mean, because of that consistency, that forward motion, we're down to really redefining what Nonstatic is and what our goals are.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that we don't need to overhaul your life, right? Maybe you just need to change your next 5 minutes. And I think if we can kind of shift our process or shift our perspective a little bit, I think that's going to help everybody out a lot.
Well, the thing is too, like, there's a book that I always read, and it's been so good. It's called The Slight Edge, and it's just getting 1% better every day. Like intentionally, just doing something intentional every day, and it doesn't have to be much. And if you just work on one thing to get 1% better every day, or 1% improvement, over the course of a year, you can be 365% better.
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
and it may seem like very slow, but then you look back over the year, like, and then you really look back at the way you were at the beginning of the year or
Right.
beginning of the period, and if you were consistent, it's amazing how much change you actually have made.
Right. It's kind of it's similar to when you compare a marathon runner to a sprinter, right? The sprinter takes off a heck of a lot faster than the marathon runner.
Leaves the runner in the dust.
Leaves the runner in the dust, but can't get nearly as far as the marathon runner, you know? And again, I'm not picking on sprinters or very different athletes, but that's kind of the point in life is not to take off as fast as you possibly can go.
Well, life is a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. And so the whole goal is to pace yourself and kind of figure out along the way to a certain extent. And I would also add that, you know, motion is medicine for a lot of us. You know, moving forward doesn't have to mean fast. Okay. And the goal shouldn't be perpetual progress. You know, the goal should be, you know, staying non-static and avoiding stagnation in your life. The moment we get stagnation is when we start to regress to an extent.
Yeah.
And you've used it before. If we're not growing, you're dying, right? To an extent.
Not growing.
And that's really a bit dramatic.
Yep.
But that's how the body works. That's how our physical bodies work.
There really is so much truth to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right, so I'll work on closing it up here because I've been given strict instructions to keep it to around 30 minutes, and we're a little over.
Yeah, it's gonna be okay, Josh. This one, I mean, you had a lot to go over.
So I want to kind of reiterate where we're going. This is non-static practical psychology to keep you moving forward. All right, we're not going to. That's not to say we're going to ignore the past, but we're going to acknowledge the past and use it to kind of help us move forward. Every episode going forward will give you tools, not just theories. There's plenty of theories out there. I want to give people actual tools that they can use that make sense. So next time our next podcast is going to, like I mentioned, is going to be focusing on the science of starting. And so we're going to talk about why beginnings feel heavier than they should. In other words, more difficult than they should, and what psychology actually says about making that first step easier. So hopefully that gives some practical steps for people or some practical tools for people to kind of get started.
Yeah.
So to kind of wrap it up, I just want to thank everybody for listening. Hopefully we have some new listeners with us, but I also want to thank the people that have been with us for a long time. They're probably wondering what the whirlwind is of this podcast is like from the beginning of when it started until now. But I just wanted to kind of thank them for being with us. But I want to make let's make this podcast one where insight translates into action. And that's really where I want to park it, is to help people understand that we're going to take theories and psychology and apply it directly into our lives so that we can take action on it in a small but meaningful way.
Said perfectly. I like that.
So this is Nonstatic. Let's keep moving.
Let's do it.